Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ladies. Oh, I was wrong. Welcome to the writer's class. Oh, I felt like I said that so well. One more time. Welcome to the writer's class. Ooh, yep. I'm loving my own voice today. That's the narcissism level I'm on. Oh, well, Nona. And I normally have a Jade, which is funny to say because I think most of these things I do by myself and go normally have a Jade on either side. And if she was here, she would have stopped that whole welcome to the writer's class thing. She would have definitely like, nope. But anyway, I wrote books. Go figure. Yeah, I'm making it really short for everyone who's like normally listen to everything else. It's really short. I got 3 hours of sleep. Everything about it, what I do today is really short, including my patients. And I thought divorce was bad, and I thought being grown up was easy. If only I were me, a memoir in verse, Foreign Coffee, Widow's Web, and Widow's Debt. You can find those books wherever you get your audiobooks. And yes, if you're counting along, that was 6 audiobooks. But we have 17 books because I want to be braggadocious right now. 17 is kind of cool. You can find out the 11 other books at andithoughladies.com. And since I am running short on patience and enthusiasm, I'm going to have to do it like a car salesman because that's the most fun you're going to get out of me today. I'm sorry, I'm normally humorous and adorable. And as you can tell from my hairstyle, I am not adorable, but I'm going to pull out humor through a car salesman thing. So you can find the rest of those 11 books at www.andithoughladies.com. Oh, that felt good. Inside the soul, I feel refreshed, like my narcissism is ready to go for another round. But you're not here to hear about me. You're here to hear about our wonderful guests. Wonderful guests, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Winona. Thank you so much for asking me to be on your show. And so I am KMA Sullivan. And let's see, 3 things. Well, probably the biggest part of my time is I'm the founder and publisher at YesYes Books, which is predominantly a poetry press, but also we've got some wonderful fiction and increasingly so. And then I'm also a writer, and I've got a couple of poetry collections that have been published by other presses, Black Lawrence Press and Sibling Rivalry. And I am a fiction writer that's newer, and I'm working on my first novel, and it is a collaborative ghost novel that I'm writing with one of my sons. And so that's 3 things. I think
that is 3 things. I'm sorry, you were working with your child. How was that going?
It's so wonderful. It's so wonderful. I hope it's wonderful for him. You know, my biggest fear is that he's just, patting me on the head, Mom, this is fine, whatever. No, it's been such an amazing experience, and crafting the story arc and the characters and the mysteries, and gosh, I have had so much fun. Now we're in the actual doing the writing. We've got the outline and we've got the character development, and now we're like just chunking it out, one section at a time. And so that's slightly less fun, but we'll be so happy when the finished product is done, and that should probably be in the next 6 months. And and I'm also excited to be writing in a different genre too. I've written poetry for many years, though I started late. Actually, poetry was not a thing I did when I was younger. I didn't start until I was in my mid-40s, and I love new things. I love to learn new things and do new things. And so that writing the fiction is a newer thing, especially like a ghost thriller type situation. So yeah.
Ooh, okay. Yes, I am a small narcissist, so I'm going to start by saying I know that when I write, that a little bit of the poetic verse gets thrown into the actual works. So has that helped at all when you've switched over to fiction? Do you find like it kind of has a flow and a rhythm, or are you just like fiction? I'm in my fiction mindset.
That's a great question. I think one of the things I love about poetry, writing poetry and editing poetry, reading poetry, is the precision of poetry. You know, you're boiling things all the way down so that you get this tremendous and emotional heart into just a handful of words. And I love that about poetry. And I would say James and I are similar in that regard, that we're interested that less is more regarding language, and that we want to, so this is not going to be an 800-page novel, nothing wrong with that. You know, this is going to be like 250, 300 pages, and we're going to just pack it with story and intrigue and haunting and character, because both of us really love more concentrated language. And so in that sense, it's similar to poetry.
I do love that we have an economy of words, but still make a nice point. And it's interesting when I'm like, oh, so you're switching over to fiction, and they're like, yeah, most people are like, the economy of words really hurts them, but I'm happy to hear that you're doing a great job with it and it's making it great.
Well, I love the process anyway. Yeah.
Right? Oh my goodness. What was it has to naturally lead into the question, what was your process for writing poetry then?
Well, I think part of it was, honestly, the biggest part was that I had already lived a lot of life, and so all that life was kind of packed down. I mean, my partner and I raised 5 children. I had helped my mother die well, if that makes sense, and she had brain cancer, and you know, that experience, that the love and the grief and just the life that happens was all packed in there. And so when I did enter an MFA program, which is not for everyone, it's not needed for most writers, but since I was switching from kind of full-time mom land, and I really needed that, because otherwise my children were all teenagers, and my God, I would have been in their face 24/7, right? Because the teenagers are generally a disaster, right? So, but see, they need to be that. And so I needed something else to do, you know? And so I entered a writing program, and again, that was in my mid to late 40s. And so I had a lot of life packed down in there. And so it was a matter of getting at it, like pulling it out and getting it into language, and in a way that I felt reflected truth in a concentrated way. And yeah, it just happened. My first book came, I won't say easily, but my thesis was my first collection, which was then picked up, and then whatever, 4 or 5 years later, my second collection happened, which was totally different in style. And yeah, so I don't know. I'm not a great reviser. My poetry comes out not fully formed exactly, but I'm going to say mostly formed. Mostly, I think that a lot of the work happens in my head and heart before I actually start putting it on the page. And then I do a little revision, whereas I admire, and have worked with some poets, my gosh, they are incredible master revisers. And I'm amazed by that process. I think I would throw my journal out the door if I was doing that kind of revising. I don't have that kind of patience. And so that's not a strength, but it's just reality. You know?
You're saying like MFA isn't for everyone. I went to get a degree in writing after I had a writing career. And then I was like, okay, so I have like 6 books of poetry, right? And then not including the ones I have on my own. Yeah. And so like I'm sitting there and they're like, okay, we're going to revise this. And I'm like, revise? Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah. Revise. I've revised it. And they're like, we're gonna revise it again. I'm like, okay, we're gonna revise it. We're gonna revise it again. No, we're not. No, we're not. And they're like, you just need to walk forward and read it out loud. No, I'm not.
Yeah. No, it's true. I think, especially in writing programs, a lot of times there is over revision that can occur. And actually, my program was a 3-year program, and by the 3rd year, the workshops, I found a little difficult because it was the same process, although the teachers there were amazing and I love the students that I worked with, but the workshops, I felt that a lot of students in the room had an agenda, and which is not what an editor needs to approach someone else's work with. You've got to put aside your own agenda, your own aesthetic. And I found that I was writing notes like on the workshop sheet, like of someone else's poem. And I would have put notes, I would have made some notes in my own reading the previous night. But during workshop, I would write notes like, no, we do not need to know what color the sweater was. No, we do not need to know what town this, I mean, so it's as if it felt a little performative sometimes. The students were performing editing for the professor, or they were performing editing for their own aesthetic agenda. And that's actually when I realized that I loved editing, because editing was being in relationship with the poem itself, what the poem was trying to be, not what I wanted it to be or the professor wanted it to be, but what is this little being trying to be? And so I love that aspect of editing, which I discovered during the writing program, and that's what YesYes Books came out of, that tremendous love of poetry, which again was pretty new, and then a love of the editing process.
Oh, okay. I love how you're saying that, like, what is that little being trying to be? It was like making a spark into a whole fire. Like that's just beautiful. Like, what is the poem trying to be? I don't think I've ever sat down, looked at the poem, and like, what is it? What is it being? Like,
Yeah.
I'm always like, what am I interpreting? But what is it being by itself? Words on a page. Like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel very artsy today. Honestly, you ask anyone, they were like, do the ladies talk about poetry? No. Do they write poetry? Yes.
Yeah, I
Big
love
poem.
that you write so much. Yeah, that you have 6 poetry books and then plus others, right? You've got 6 books of poetry, but then additional books beyond that. Your books, how do they split out? They
Actually, I have 3 fictions in there, but I do
okay.
have 3 fictions in the 6.
Okay.
But we do have 11 books of poetry, I think.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, I will
And
definitely be
we wrote
checking
them
those
all in
out.
3 years. Just
That's
like
okay.
3 years. Here we go.
Yeah,
Any
fantastic.
um you went from, I was gonna ask this question because it was gonna sound so beautifully and aesthetically beautiful on my part. Yes, it was an agenda, so I could sound aesthetically beautiful. But you kind of answered the question, but I'm asking anyway. You have gone from writing and nurturing your own work to nurturing other people's work. How has that like affected your mind about writing and creativity? And do you ever like look at someone else's work and be like, yeah, I gotta have like half of that for me?
That's a great question. I think that, and this is the case with editors in general, that we do devote a fair amount of our creative juice to other people's work. So one of the things that's a little bit tricky, and it's got to be an intentional choice by an editor, is that if what you're doing is spending a lot of time effectively, authentically, respectfully editing someone else's work, then what that does mean is that you don't have that kind of juice for your own work. So that's just a reality, and it needs to be an intentional choice. I don't feel, I read so much incredible poetry that I just love, that I'm so, admire. I guess I don't ever feel that work is going to, that I want to pick up elements from that work and bring it into my own, with one exception. When I read work where the author is completely, everything is at stake, and they're not listening to anyone else, they're not listening to society or culture or history. I mean, they will have read, and they're going to have, read and read and read. And honestly, I don't think you can be a really good writer without a lot of reading, but where you're not following anyone else's rules. And so an example would be, for instance, Claudia Rankine. I mean, her work is mind-blowing, particularly since how can we even call it poetry? But we do, because that's what she said it is, but she's making her own set of rules and then doing this incredibly important work. And so I love when I read C.D. Wright is another example. Berriman was an example. I mean, writers who basically make their own rules and then they write poetry within their own rule set. That is important for me to always remember. I don't need to follow anyone else's rules. So I feel like I need that lesson. I need to be reminded of that lesson on a pretty regular basis because we tend to be rule followers. That's why humanity exists as in communities. I mean, we're kind of born for that. But when it comes to art, gosh, we need to expose ourselves and appreciate other art again and again and again. But when we're creating art, we've got to try and break free of expectations outside ourselves so that we're really creating from our own center. And so reading poets and other writers who do that reminds me of that. And then that allows me to do a bit better by my own work.
Wow. It reminds me of this talk that the former poet laureate of South Dakota gave about reading like a writer. And wow, it's making me want to reread a few poems myself. Oh. So how did you start the publishing house, YesYes Books? And what does YesYes Books mean for you?
Let's see. Well, so I started it in the third year of my graduate program, and I had already started a literary magazine, which then went for many years, and Philip B. Williams and I did that together. I founded it, but then within, I think, the second or third issue, even Philip was working with me, and Philip is an incredible poet and whose first novel is coming out soon, and I just love everything he does. And so I think I had to figure out what to do with my love of poetry. It was so intense and new. It was so I actually, when I entered the MFA program, I actually entered as a fiction candidate, which makes no sense because I don't have any published fiction, but I needed to get into a creative writing program. I did know that. And they didn't have a creative nonfiction. And that's what my previous published work had been in. And so I was like, well, okay, I'm going to write some short stories and I'm going to see if I can get into this creative writing program. And it happened. But the first poetry workshop I took, first of my lifetime in the MFA program, I was like, oh, wait a minute, hang on. No, this is what I need to be writing. And so the love of poetry was very, very new for me at that point. And I had assumed that I would take the degree and teach, because I've done also a lot of teaching through my life. But I realized pretty early on, I was just too old to put up with the BS in the academic world. It's ridiculous. I was not going to waste my time with that. And so, okay, so what do I do with the love of poetry? Oh, okay. I think I'll start a press. And I was just going to do a little one. I mean, I didn't have any real idea, real set ideas. What's that quote? And I think it's from Ray Bradbury, but it might be from somebody else. That says, jump off the cliff and build your wings on the way down. That's pretty typical of how I operate. And thank God my family loves me anyway. So, I just started. I didn't know anything. I didn't even know the terms, like the words, the vocabulary words that you use when you talk to a printer. And I knew very few people in literature or poetry or anything, but this is 12 years ago. Facebook was really fresh and new, and a vibrant place at that point, and which it is no longer. And I was able to just get in contact with people and write them about how much I love their work. And then I had met some folks, some writers, at least online through the literary magazine that Philip and I were doing. And so I just had to do something with the love of poetry, and that's where the press came from.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a traditional press. Let's just make sure that I got that clear.
Sure. In that we're not traditional, in that we receive submissions and we read through submissions and accept, get back with offers for publication, and then we pay for all the costs associated with publishing. And so it's not a collaborative press, which do exist, and we can't actually take a book that's already been published, even if it's self-published. But I will tell you this: I'm a fan of self-publication. I'm out there looking, and especially I think the publishing world needs a real good revamping. And but prior to that, what's happening, and it's wonderful to see, I think self-publication is becoming bigger and more important, and is a beautiful road for writers. So it is a small press and a traditional publishing platform, but I'm a fan of folks who walk their work forward. That of course means, as you know, it adds a whole big job to your job. So you're your own publicist. You're creating, you're making sure you're up on platforms, and so that people recognize you and your work. And but I love it. I think it's really a good road for a lot of folks.
It's a great road. I especially I feel in poetry, because I just talked to a literary agent, and he was like, I think there's 3 publishing houses that are large, that we would consider to be large, that would take poets.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, being published at 10, I knew this. Like, I was like, oh, I'm gonna be like, at the big 5 when I'm 12, yay. And no, they don't do poetry.
Right. Right. Most of the poets that I know who have agents even have offer both a poetry collection and a novel or something like that. And so they'll get their poetry collection in with the agent, but what the agent's going to do is market their novel or their short story collection along with the poetry collection. And the issue there is there's just not enough readers of poetry. There's not enough money for the big houses to be interested. I hate that reality, but that's what it is. Yeah.
I think there are readers of poetry.
Oh, there are, but there are not enough of them. We need more.
That's a discussion for another time.
Well, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I feel discussion for another time.
Okay. All right. All right.
So what books do you feel like we really need to sit up and take notice of that YesYes Books has? Like, you have to read them. If you're going to start with anything, it's got to be these people.
Well, I mean, I love all the books we put out. If you think about if you think about the fact that we'll get 1,000 submissions in our 4 different reading periods, 1,000 to 1,200 submissions in our 4 different periods, and we can publish 8. We're a small press, and I just wish we could publish double or triple that, but we just we don't have the, the finances for that. And so what that means is that every single book we publish, we really seriously believe in. We believe in the writer, the work they're doing, and that it needs to be said. So, for instance, there's a book that just recently came out called Cataloging Pain. And that's by an author, Alison Blevins, and it's a lyric memoir. So it's not strictly speaking poetry, it's a memoir in verse. And that has to do with, she's a mother of 3 fairly young children, and she has had a diagnosis of MS in the last few years, and she is in pain a lot, and her body is shifting a lot in terms of what it can and cannot do. And as she is coming to terms with this diagnosis, she is still a mom, and she's still a partner and a lover. And in fact, her partner, in the time period this book covers, is also transitioning. So her partner's body is becoming free as her body is becoming a cage. And that's what that book is about. So to me, it's just incredible the way she writes about it and the experience that she offers. And even those of us who aren't going to have that exact experience, she writes in such a way that brings us in and allows us to see this world with her. So that would be a book that just recently came out from YesYes Books. Another book is Ugly Music by Dianelli Antigua, is just a beautiful, gorgeous book. The language is very easy to be absorbed, if that makes sense. I mean, some poetry requires a lot of work, right, to get what's going on. And Dianelli's work is very approachable and incredibly meaningful and resonant. And so that's a book I would recommend. And we've got a book that just came out just a couple weeks ago called Bone Language by Jamaica Baldwin. And that has a lot to do with Jamaica's relationship with her mother and as a cancer survivor, and with racism throughout her life. And so that's Bone Language. I love them all. Winona, that's all I can say. I feel like they all need to exist in the world. They
have amazing and beautiful topics. And I mean, all these topics sound like they were just born to be expressed in poetic verse. Just wow. Okay, so 2 questions. One is a narcissist question. You do not have to answer it, and it is of self-interest. I just wanted to know, would you be interested in a murder mystery done in poetry?
Oh, wow. That is an exciting idea. And of course, we're getting more and more fiction in poetry, like Elizabeth Acevedo's work, for example. And so I love the general concept, but I haven't seen a murder mystery in poetic verse.
No one really has, because we're getting it edited right now. And they're like, so we're gonna look at a model, and they were like, do you have a model? I'm like, no, neither do I.
Well, and again, though, but that's the kind of thing we need to be thinking outside of the box, and not just allow the rules that have been presented to us to be the rules that we follow. No, I mean, all of those rules, almost all rules, are made up, right? So let's not follow them for no reason. And well, so that's a conversation we'll have to have offline.
And then my second question is question. Oh, wait, which is what everyone wants to know. Everyone wants to know this answer. What do you look for in a manuscript to be like, yes, this is the book I'm going to publish?
Okay, well, I do have an answer for that. And honestly, our aesthetic is quite broad. But there's something that's always the same, which is that I am looking for a manuscript that will light me on fire. That's what I'm always looking for. And normally the way that happens is it means that the author has gone all the way into themselves, because that's where the unique language shows up. So I'm never interested in, say, objectifying language or simplistic language. I'm not interested in mechanics that run the show. A mechanic always has to be in service of the engine, of the heart of the work, fiction or poetry. And so I'm looking for work that demonstrates that the author has everything at stake and that they have found the unique language to access what they're trying to write about.
I think that answers it beautifully. Oh, so that my follow-up question to that is going to be like, what 3 mistakes do you see that just immediately like, nope, this person needs more time to learn their craft before they have put their manuscript into the world?
Yes, and actually that's something that I've started to speak about at conferences, because I would love to help people figure out how to get their submission to the top of the pile, right? So if the pile they're in has 400 or 500 or 600 manuscripts, how do you get into the top 100? And honestly, I don't feel it's that difficult to get into the top 100. So can I give you more than 3 things?
Go for it. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So the obvious one is copy editing. Please copy edit your manuscript. Now, I won't reject a manuscript that because it hasn't been copy edited, but it's important to understand how tired editors are. We are so tired. We read hundreds of manuscripts and hundreds, and it's all for love. Because I'll tell you, nobody really cares who the editors are out there. Nobody cares. You know, we're kind of invisible, and that's fine. We do it because we love the work. So copy edit your stuff. Also, don't get fancy with formatting, because that actually leaves the impression with the editor that you're going to be fussy and you're going to really need to control the design. The editor and the publisher have got to control the design. That's just a thing. That's why we're here. And that doesn't mean that the author is not going to contribute to the ideas about the design, but you don't want to make it look like you're going to be more work than the average human.
Okay, in that case, I pull my earlier offer about the murder mystery book. Never mind.
Well, unless the formatting and design is part of the project, which can happen, absolutely can.
Poem that's actually read in the way of the heart, so it follows the circulation through the heart.
Oh, no, but that's fine. That's different. That's the format of the piece, which is different from, I'll get a manuscript that has a wild font. Like, what are you doing? Just give me a readable font. I just need to be able to read the work. And no, I'm not talking about, no, that's fine. Like, shape poetry is beautiful. That's fantastic. But the shape is serving the poem, right? In that example, I would imagine. Yes. No, that's fantastic. Thank you for making that comment, though, because then that allowed me to clarify what I was talking about. No, it's like some wild font, and that's like, what's happening? I can barely read this now, But there's more important stuff actually to watch out for. So one of them, it would be to make sure that your language is fresh. Make sure that your language is precise and say what you want to say exactly the way it needs to be said. And a lot of writers don't do that, or they'll do it 80% of the time, but then 20% of the time, it's a little less unique, a little less fresh. I don't mean use the thesaurus endlessly, but just get the exact right word. And also pay attention, especially in a poetry collection, with how the poems talk to one another, right? They talk to one another across a collection. A lot of poets, and of course I'm a poet, we get focused on each individual piece, and we remember writing each poem. We remember the experiences that led to the writing of each poem. So we can get a little bogged down in that as a writer. But when you're presenting a manuscript, back up a little bit and pay attention to how each of the poems are chatting with one another. So if you have the word pineapple in a poem, and it shows up 30 pages later in the collection, what you need to know is those poems are talking to one another. Now, maybe you want that to happen, but probably you don't. So then maybe the pineapple needs to become a mango so that it can be its own spot, and so there's a lot of movement across the poems in a collection. Yeah,
I
that's
love it. And yeah, I'm gonna talk about me again. I'm sorry, y'all. This is a big day, but I never get to talk about poetry and me. But I feel like this is really important, especially for a body of poetic work to also be poetry, to be the like almost third person, like he would write, I'm not omnipresent in fiction, poetry that like, because I know like your emotions are in this, and so you're in it, and then but if you pull yourself out and be like, she did and she said, like in your head when you're writing and then like how did she feel instead of how did I feel, you'll get a poem that like the actual audience understands and not just you fixated on you and your emotions. And a lot of times, because if they're all standalone pieces, they're not actually work. I'm sorry, I'm being very preachy. And then
an interesting thing. No,
I find it very interesting because I talk to a lot of times with poets and I'm like, oh, you can turn poetry into a script. And they say, what now? And I'm like, okay, you can definitely do it because like in my head, I write with sometimes 13 other ladies. Sometimes at the max, it's 13 other women, and they're turning poetry. And my job is to turn that into a collection, which means that I now write the pieces that connect all the other pieces.
Oh, wow. That's a very cool project.
That then does the entire overarch of the poetry collection. So my pieces help you run through the poetry collection and they connect the poetry into weaving. That is my
fantastic. Well, and that actually brings
important to know what your collection wants to say. You have to listen to the poem and figure out what it's saying, and then what they're saying as a body, and then figure out what you need to say to make it apparent.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's wonderful. And I would say connected in a way is this the idea of like narcissism and poetry. Sometimes that can fuel the poetry frequently. And that's wonderful. Sometimes it gets in the way of the poetry. And one place where I think it can get in the way is when I'm reading submissions, it's pretty easy for me to see when collections are written by a writer who doesn't understand that everyone is broken and everyone is in pain, that they privilege their own experience as if other people's experiences are secondary, not as interesting, not as meaningful. Now, and I'm not sure how clearly I can talk about this, but I think as a writer, you're not going to have a mature voice until you are able to see humanity in a fairly complex way. And so a lot of the poetry I receive is about personal trauma. And I am happy to read that, and that's important. But the richest poetry comes from writers, and this obviously is an opinion, who also acknowledge that their trauma is not the only trauma. It's not that they even need to say that thing, it's how they write about their own pain. There's a sense, if in writing about their own pain, they are also objectifying others or simplifying or making tropes of others, that's an indicator that they don't understand that their trauma is in a landscape of trauma, and they don't need to talk about other people's trauma, but somehow that move to view humanity as a complex whole, W-H-O-L-E, right? Whole, because it could have gone either way there, really. And is important it enriches the writer's work. And so it weakens a writer's work, in my opinion, when the writer doesn't understand that while they've got to go all the way into their experience, it's not in a vacuum. It's in this complex landscape of humanity where really everyone is broken in one way or another. Yeah.
I love that. I believe it was said that as a poet, we are the conscience of
Mm.
society. And in order to be the conscience of anything, you have to understand the thought processes behind it, the emotions that made the choices, and the reason we're going forward in an amoral or moral way.
Mhm.
That is when your conscience will step in. So in order for you to be a good poet, you need to recognize the landscape of the society that you are in and then speak on it through your particular voice.
Mhm. Yeah,
That's my silliness for the day.
I love it. I love it.
So can you tell us where we can find more books of YesYes Books, more about you on possibly social media or your website?
Yes, so YesYesBooks.com. That's the website. And so that's got all of our books. And then we do have Instagram, which is also YesYes Books. And then Twitter, but Twitter is about to leave us, and I'm not going to be sad about that. And so, yeah, and then my writing is under KMA Sullivan, though my fiction collaborative with my son will be under the author name Catherine James, and his name is James. So it's all going to work out.
Loving the writer name. You're supposed to do like your pet's name in your street to make your like soap
That's
opera
true.
name.
There you go. There you go.
Why is this not your writer's name? So much for being here, KMA from YesYes Books. I had thoroughly appreciated the time, and I did not know that I needed to talk about poetry today, but it
I
turns
love
out
it.
I did. I know I'm supposed to get on here and be like, oh, it's a poet. Okay.
I know we're a strange breed, but you know that. You know that we are. So I'm so glad we got to talk about it today. Thank you so much.
I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. I'm Wilnona from the And I Thought Ladies. Yes, there's like more than just one lady in the And I Thought Ladies. Isn't that a scary thought with all the bouncy energy that I have? But anyway, you can find out everything that the ladies are up to at www.andithoughladies.com. When you go to that page, please go down to the bottom of the page, no longer the middle of the page, but the bottom of the page. And you can see the charities that we proudly support. We ask that you take a little bit of your time out and give them a little support as well. We thank you in advance for that. And remember that wisdom is all around you if you're open to finding it and accepting it. So peace and love, you guys, from Wilnona and the Missing Jade. Oh yeah, thanks for listening.